So I am going to first of all ask Maurin Picard if he is on the line. Maurin is the US correspondent of Le Figaro and Le Soir, and someone who has written on this subject. He's going to speak about French officers' plot against the UN and the hostile OAS cell in Katanga. Welcome, Maurin, and over to you.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? So my name is Maurin Picard. I'm very glad to join you today. I'm a journalist by trade, and I'm here in the capacity as an author and researcher. What I want to share with you today is the product of several years of research into many funds and archives. And I want to reassert a point that my esteemed friend Henning Melber made this morning. After so much time digging in so many places, it is obviously and painfully clear that more or less nothing remains in terms of sensitive files to be found regarding the Ndola case. If these files still exist, be it near London, Paris, Washington, or Pretoria, they are entirely classified and unlikely to be ever open to the public. Why? It sounds like a conclusion already. As Judge Richard Goldstone said a few years ago, embarrassment is a powerful leverage in politics, even 62 years later, 63 actually. But some interesting finds can still be made, and some have been made, for example, more recently in Belgian archives and French National Archives. When I first came upon the Dag Hammarskjöld investigation 8 years ago, the first people I spoke with raised the issue of France's troubled relationship with Dag Hammarskjöld and the United Nations in 1961. The first one was Roger Lipsey, Dag Hammarskjöld's biographer. He took time to explain how strained this relationship had become between the French government, led by President Charles de Gaulle, and the 38th floor in New York, mainly because of decolonization crisis arising in Algeria and Tunisia. The other one was Susan Williams. She suggested that the French officers involved in Katanga deserved more attention and a thorough investigation. I set out to do exactly that, established what responsibilities French decision makers and foot soldiers could possibly bear in the crash of the Albertina and the Katangese crisis as a whole. The outcome of this research has provided the grounds for a book published in 2019, detailing French involvement in the plot against Hammarskjöld, known as Monsieur H. But it wasn't enough. There is still a lot of information that needs to be collected, archives still classified. I endeavored to locate and meet the last witnesses, the last living players of this clandestine game in Africa. And there will be a second book in June, delving more specifically into the lives of the 25 French so-called mercenaries spotted in Katanga at the time of the events. For 5 years now, I have researched French, Belgian, UN archives, and I have tried to corroborate what I found with American, British, Swedish diplomatic archives with the help of some of my esteemed friends here today. Here are my findings and a bit of background to the extent that they can clarify the chain of events leading to the crash of the DC-6 SEBDY in Ndola on September 18, 1961. Let me take you 7 months earlier. The time is February 1961. Some Katangese hardliners have managed to convince President Chombe in Katanga that he should hire a select group of elite French officers, all of them veterans of Indochina and Algerian wars. The goal of these people is to train the army of Katanga and prepare for war against the Congolese National Army. The French government will make no obstacle, as it will help remove some dangerous characters away from Algeria, where a military putsch is brewing against de Gaulle. Having men such as Colonel Trinquier and Major Falk flown away from Algiers carries some advantages. Their skills, their military skills, will be put to good use for a good cause, but not only. Paris is also seriously contemplating a takeover of Katanga and its mineral resources, notwithstanding Belgian hostility, English and South African mining interests, Congolese central authorities, the UN, and even Moscow. First, you send a diplomat and open a consulate. Then, if conditions allow, you will be the first Western power to recognize Katanga's independence and transform the consulate into an embassy. A French airline company, UAT, gets exclusive access to the capital, Elisabethville, nowadays Lubumbashi, and fighter jets called Fouga Magister are to be transferred to the nascent Katangese Air Force, while Colonel Tranquier himself begins to recruit 100 men for his small enterprise. Things rapidly go sideways. The Congolese Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba has been abducted and is found murdered by his captors in Katanga. There is worldwide shock and anger. Paris immediately backtracks and orders Tranquier to abort his mission. But Tranquier travels nevertheless to Katanga and is forced to step back, while his lieutenants, under the command of Roger Folk, manage to settle in Katanga pretty much incognito. Under Folk's orders, they will evade the UN's attention for several months and stay under the radar. On August 28, 1961, when the UN moves aggressively for the first time against the mercenaries, almost all French officers take to the bush and will remain out of reach. This is the breaking point. What these men do next will unleash a chain reaction with dramatic consequences. The US is soon informed that the French officers have created a liquidation list of personalities to be targeted for murder. On top of that list are UN officials. It is also learned that they are preparing for a guerrilla war of the kind they learned in the jungles of Indochina and the streets of the Kasbah in Algiers. They are ready to wage an insurrection against the UN. Ideology plays a disproportionate role here. These men, under Folk's command, believe that the UN has completely surrendered to Afro-Asian interests and that it will do everything it can to destroy the last bastion of the white man, I quote, in this part of Africa. This, for them, cannot be tolerated. Where these men failed in Algeria, they now want to succeed in Katanga. The only way is to militarily defeat the Blue Helmets, inflict heavy losses, and force them to withdraw completely, while the Security Council will be forced to recognize the reality of Katanga's independence. When Operation Morthor, the second strike against the mercenaries, is launched by the UN on September 13, 1961, 4 days before Dag Hammarskjöld takes off for Ndola, the French officers are on a war footing, ready to hit back with small armed mobile groups in the streets of Elisabethville. Major Folks leads the fighting, while two of his men, Captains La Simone and De Clary, will manage to encircle an Irish company in Jadoville. A relief column for the Irish is even stopped by the last operational Fouga Magister, and we know this story already. The fighting recedes around Saturday, September 16th. The next day, while Dag Hammarskjöld prepares to take off for Ndola, Folks and most of his men are nowhere to be seen. They seem to have fled to the Rhodesian border near Kipushi, where Moïse Tshombe himself is hiding. What happens next? We have a very partial knowledge. Long forgotten witnesses have revealed there was a party of around 6 to 8 white men in 2 Land Rovers with some radio equipment near the crash site the night of the crash. Knut Hammarskjöld, Dag's nephew, on February 5th, 1963, will write about a psychological warfare commando led by famous French Colonel Folks, I quote. Direct witnesses recall such a commando, 2 of them mentioning strange uniforms never seen before. When shown by me some leopard fatigues typically worn by French paratroopers in Algeria, those witnesses were fairly certain this is what they saw that night. These men also spoke with a strange accent. One of them was possibly Afrikaner. It turns out that in Elisabethville, Roger Folks himself later said he had been unexpectedly reinforced by South African snipers, which we assume could be South African special forces. We also know now that 2 of his subaltern officers, La Simone and Bordeaux, had met with a British intelligence officer the week before the crash in the bush, also along the Rhodesian border. The goal here was to set up a real base for the French officers and benefit from Rhodesian assistance against the UN forces. The last intriguing point I want to share with you is a detail of the crash itself. Amidst the wreckage, there were 4 bodies located around the cockpit area. Two of them were the pilots. The other two were a Canadian secretary and a Haitian bodyguard. Give or take Hammarskjöld himself, they were the only two francophones aboard the Albertina. And they had nothing to do in the cockpit when the plane went down. So what pushed them in the front area, forcing the flight engineer to take a back seat with the other passengers, where he was found strapped to his seat? What was Alice Lalande and Serge Barrot's special task in the cockpit at this very moment? Does it mean they had been summoned to the cockpit to use their language skill for some outside communication with some unknown correspondent? Were there some French-speaking mercenaries either in the sky or on the ground trying to speak with the crew? And what was their message at this time? Without recordings from the control tower or declassified radio intercept from the NSA, we may never know what went on in the cockpits that night. None of this, however, weighs sufficiently to confirm some sort of French responsibility in the tragedies. There are, however, other sources, more recently discovered information that lead us towards some kind of involvement, at least some form of plotting against Hammarskjöld. First, a facsimile of a death threat against the Secretary General, signed OAS, Secret Army Organization pro-French Algeria. This document was found buried deep in French National Archives. Second, a sinister warning signed OAS Katanga, that was sent to the UN spokesperson in Katanga, Michel Tomblaine, on August 30th, 1961, urging him to leave under 48 hours or else. Third, an obvious sign of OAS influence within the separatist state of Katanga was the identical motto the movement and the separatist state shared: Katanga vaincra, Katanga atawina, or Katanga shall win, if you want, just like the official motto from the OAS, OAS vaincra, known for its somber black and white posters hanging on all the walls of French and Algerian towns by 1961, and you would see a knife slicing through the country. We know the head of propaganda inside the Katanga's regime was one of the French officers, one of Folk's second in command, Yves de la Bourdonnais, who was an openly pro-OAS officer, just like other Folk subordinates such as Michel Bader, Léon Heger, and Égard Tupé-Thomé. Number four, the whereabouts of some French officers are also intriguing as well. Having completely vanished right before September 17th, three of them reappear in Johannesburg, then in Douala, in the days following the crash, through clandestine networks. It is important to note that these three men, La Bourdonnais, Heger, and Bader, had not been expelled from Katanga by the UN. Heger even writes a letter to a correspondent in Paris on September 20th, 2 days after the crash, saying, H is dead, good riddance. Their absence from Elisabethville in the midst of the guerrilla warfare led by their charismatic leader Roger Folk is absolutely puzzling. All three of them were serious fighting assets. They do, however, present very specific skills. Bader was a former 11e Shock paratrooper, special forces from the secret services. He fought in Algeria. La Bourdonnais, as we noted, is an expert of psychological warfare and a veteran paratrooper. Heger is a battle-hardened clandestine radio operator in Indochina and Algeria. Those skills make up for a perfect commando of 3 or more special forces soldiers. Although France formally cooperated with the UN investigation since 2017, it is puzzling, again, that no document whatsoever regarding these men, all sent to Katanga by the French Ministry of Defense and the Élysée Palace, was ever retrieved and communicated to Judge Chande Othman. Not even a single piece of information about the actions of the most famous of them, Roger Folk, who curiously went on to take other semi-formal assignments covered by SDEC, the French Secret Service, in Yemen, in Biafra, has ever been shared with the UN. Even though French archives are mute about Folk's outfits and show some obvious lack of cooperation with the UN investigation, most of the revelations here do originate from Katangi's archives stored in Belgium, where no one ever thought or tried to make them disappear. It is the proof for us that much can yet be found in unsuspecting places and bring us closer to solving one day the riddle of the Albertina. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maurin. That's a fascinating presentation, which I hope will help us get the full breadth of what is before us in this respect.